Hello and welcome to episode 61 of Geek and Speak, the Geek and Seek podcast. Today we are doing a tier list. I don't think we've ever done a tier list on the podcast before. We are doing a dual land tier list. Should be a pretty good time. Joined with me today is Preston. Preston, how's it going, man?
Going pretty good. We've been agreeing a lot these past couple episodes. I think this one, we're gonna have a few more things to say to each other, a little bit more argumentative. So, this should be a fun one.
I agree. And then we also have Jason with us today. How's it going, Jason?
Going good. I always do enjoy talking about lands, mainly because I don't think you need as many as the other guys do. Not that this episode is about that, but I always like to throw that out there.
Yeah. Had to get that little note in there. And then, hello, I am your host, Morgan. This should be a fun one. We haven't done a tier list, like I said, so it'll be fun to give that a try, as well as we have some very differing opinions on some of these. There are several we agree on, but several we don't. So it should be a good talk. If you would like to support the show, you can do all the normal YouTube UB algorithm stuff, like liking this video, sharing it with a friend, checking out our other videos, being subscribed if you're not, leaving comments, blah, 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 blah. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can head over to patreon.com/geekandseek YouTube. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can hop in our Discord. You can find a link to that in the description of this video. All right. Favorite comment from the week. This is from last week's podcast episode where we were talking about token decks, and this is from Razzle Frazzle 69. Nice. The best
Nice.
win con in tokens is definitely Jetmir Nexus of Revels. It is Naya though. Yes. That is a pretty spicy card. That is for 1 red, green, white, 5/4 cat demon. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample as long as you control 6 or more creatures. And then creatures you control also have +1/+0 and have double strike as long as you have 9 or more creatures. So really good finisher in creature token decks, but it is very restricted into what kinds of token decks it can go in just because it is 3 specific colors. Do you guys know this card? Have you ever got to play it before?
I saw the card when New Cabana was coming out, and I was like, this is gonna be a really, really cool token commander, or like even just even if you're not running creature tokens and you're just running like a big creature base, um, really fun commander and definitely powerful in those token strategies if you could fit it into to those colors. I mean, it's got white and green, which we said in that episode are the best token making colors.
Yeah.
So definitely see where you're coming with this, and I think that this would be a really fun token commander to build around.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've never played with it personally, but I've seen people use it online, and it can be kind of oppressive for some of those lower power groups. Does not take a lot for this deck to win in a couple turns.
Nah, nine creatures sounds like a lot until you just make a couple good creature token producers, and then it kind of goes ham. Yeah, pretty sweet. All right. So, like I said, we have a tier list going on today, and we are going to be uh going through as many of these as possible, depending on how we go on time. I believe we'll be able to get through all of these. We will see how that goes. We have them ranked mostly in the ones like from most obvious we should talk about if we don't have time to get to them, not that big of a deal, but we should have time for it. To quickly summarize how this tier list is going to go. S is auto include. You're playing this from anything from 2 to 5 color decks. A is you're going to play it often. Probably goes in all your 2 color decks. Probably goes in a lot of your 3 to 5 color decks, but maybe not as an auto include. B is fine. You will play it some of the time. You're not that sad to play it, but it's not your first pick. C is for certain decks. Maybe it has a certain payoff or certain synergy that like it's really, really good in a certain deck, but otherwise you're going to try to avoid it given the choice. D is very bad. I would sometimes play it for budget reasons. And then F is throw it into Mount Doom. I would not play this in a million years. A basic land is better than this, blah, blah, blah. Actually, D is usually also better than a basic land, but that's neither here nor there. All right. We also have 3 kind of not dual lands, but we can't have a land tier list and not talk about them. So we're going to get those out of the way before we hit the actual dual lands. So first off, let's start off with fetch lands. These are Pretty straightforward. Everyone kind of knows what these are. So for example, we have Verdant Catacombs, which you can tap it, pay a life, sacrifice it, and search for a swamp or a forest to put onto the battlefield. Notably, it can be any forest, it can be any swamp, and you can have it come into play untapped if it's you have the right requirements met. These are really good. There's one of these for every color combination. All of us put these at S. Oh wait, no, Preston has it at an A. Preston, explain your A.
I just think for the budget, like how much they cost, they're not as much as auto includes as some of the other options you have available to you.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say they're not good, but they're very expensive cards that your deck can work fine without.
I guess I said S but with dot 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 because that was my point too, is that if you're building optimally, you should play them or you should play some number of them, but they are kind of expensive. They are cheaper than they used to be. The Modern Horizons 2, we got reprints of half of them. Modern Horizons 3, we got reprints of the other half of them. They are actually like a lot of them are cheaper than Shocklands now. So that's something to keep in mind. Like if you buy these up if you want them while they're um, reprints are in cycle. It's worth having them in your collection. It is hard to justify if you need a lot of them though. But even then, if you're playing a 5-color deck, do you play all 10 of them? Probably not. Maybe if you're a
No.
landfall deck, maybe if you're a landfall deck, you could find the justification to run all 10 in a 5-color deck, but that seems extreme. And then also if you want to be really spiky, you could run the off-color fetches as well, but I wouldn't.
You
So
should not run off-color fetches.
okay. Yeah, I'm looking at some of these fetch lands on TCG, and I mean my pushback is because we've gotten decent amount of reprints for them over the past couple of years. I think that they're fine. I think that they're perfect for an S tier. If you're gonna rank these, because if you think about some other types of lands that we're going to talk about, like the battle bond lands, a lot of those run for about the same price as the fetch lands, because the reprints have happened. So I think that if you're going to, spend money on certain types of lands that, spend more than $10, more than 12, 13, $14 on a land, it better do something good for you like this. The fetch lands, not only are they going to trigger landfall stuff twice, but they can go into any deck regardless of color because they don't have any pips on them.
Yep.
So if you're building a deck that's simply just landfall, like get as many lands entering or lands going to my graveyard triggers, the fetch lands are really good for those. And then even just for your standard deck, the fetch lands are going to do work. Obviously, you don't want to play them in monocolored decks unless it's, like I said, one of those landfall type decks where you want to be just having a bunch of lands enter or go to your graveyard. But for 2-color decks and up, I don't see how, you don't include these in those decks. And I mean, you don't have to pay exuberant amounts of money for all of them. There's like Polluted Delta you could find for like $11, which I'm pretty sure that's like around the same price as what the battle bond lands would go for. So that's my pushback on that. I don't think price is as big of a factor for the fetch lands
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, there are other
That's
ones
fair.
on this list that are more of a factor when price is involved, but because of good reprints the last couple of years, these are more affordable than really ever before. So that's worth keeping in mind. They're basically perfect fixing because yeah, they'll grab your basics or whatever, but they're going to grab a lot of your dual lands. A lot of your dual lands are fetchable, and they can grab triomes, which is helpful when you get to 3 to 5-color decks. So with that said, it does average out to in S, so we will throw that sucker up there. Speaking of triomes, let's talk about triomes. So we got half of these in Ikoria and the other half of them in Streets of New Capenna. They are fetchable lands, so they have 3 different types. So, for example, we have Zagoth Triome, which is a swamp forest island, meaning it can tap for a black, green, or a blue. They do always enter the battlefield tapped, but late game you can cycle them away for 3 mana. I love these. I put them as an S. Oh, everyone has these as an S. I think these go in all 3-color decks, all 4-color decks, and I think you play some number of them in 5-color decks as well. I don't think you run all 10 in a 5-color deck just for speed reasons. That's a lot of tap lands, but I think in my 5-color deck, I think I have 5 or 6 of them. So yeah.
Yeah, being fetchable, tapping for 3, and then having late game use, even if you don't want to play it as a land. This is just like the perfect land for a commander deck that's 3 or more colors. Even like 3, 4, and 5-color decks are gonna love these lands because it gives you such good fixing for your colors. They're, I mean, how pricey are these things now?
It depends. I think a lot of the Ikoria ones are like, I think the cheaper ones are in like the $12 range, and then the more expensive ones are in like the $20 range.
Yeah, so you know, that kind of goes back to what I was saying about fetch lands. If you're gonna spend money on a land, it better give you some pretty good value. And these being fetchable and having late game use, I think that they're perfect for an S tier.
Like they always enter tapped, but these are one of the few lands where that doesn't bother me really at all, as long as you're not playing too many of them. Because getting to check 3 different land types is huge in Commander in 2024.
Hmm.
Like your other lands care about your land types. Half of the cards printed nowadays seem to care about land types. So the fact that you get 3 on 1 is pretty big.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll go ahead and slap that up into S as well. And since all 3 of us said S on this, we'll put it actually above the fetch land. All right, and then the last honorable mention we had are the I don't know what these are called, the triple tap lands, I guess. So these are basically the predecessor to Triomes. They enter the battlefield tapped. For example, we have Sandstep Citadel enter the battlefield tapped, and then they tap for one of 3 different colors. So this one taps for white, black, or green. So they're not fetchable. You can't cycle them away, but I think these came out in what, probably cons. So, several years earlier. But I still like these. I play them in all 3-color decks, and then I sometimes will play them in 4 and 5-color decks, especially for budget reasons. They're, sense because they get reprinted in precons and stuff. So, much, much more budget friendly than Triome. So I gave them an A, Jason gave them an A, and Preston gave them a B. Anything to add, boys? What
I was
was your
waiting,
reason for
Preston,
giving
because
them a
Oh,
a B, Preston?
uh, I, I just build so few 3-color plus decks to where i if I'm going to build one, I have enough land options at this point. I don't have to use these. But if other people really need to for budget reasons, I completely understand.
these to me are A tier because I mean they're basically the Triomes without the land types of the cycling, which honestly, the cycling is really only a if I get it late game and I need the card more than I need the land, especially waiting for that land to untap on your next turn. But I don't think losing that ability or losing the land type is enough to drop it down to a B tier for me because there's still lands that'll tap for 3 of your colors. They're not affecting your land types at all, so there's that. But the fact that you could drop this turn 1 in a 3-color deck, and you've basically perfectly fixed your colors. Like you're obviously going to play more lands so that you have more mana, but now you'll have at least 1 color of each color that you need.
Yeah, that's why I still dig them. I still play them in all my 3-color decks, and I sometimes play them in 4 and 5-color decks as well. So we'll go ahead and slap this into A. All right, now to the list proper. Let's go ahead and start off with the obvious one. These are the OG duels. So, for example, we have Bayou. So they count as both of the land types. So they have the land types, but there's no downside at all. They just boom come in the battlefield untapped. They are reserved list. So they are very, very expensive, especially because they're playable in, Legacy, Vintage, Commander. Uh, but they're S tiers, right? Like
Yeah.
if we pretend money is
Yeah.
not a problem, or if you're in a play group that allows proxies, um, they're S tier, right?
If we
But
judge them personally, we'd all put them in F because none of us can afford them. But
Yeah,
underst understanding what they can be if you can afford them, yes, they have to go in S.
yeah, yeah. So
They're
we'll
the
go.
one dual land where you ignore the price tag fully.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah, I think that you can make the proxy argument for any of the lands that we're going to talk about that are a little bit expensive, but these ones for sure go into that category where if your play group will allow you to do it, you know, maybe not have one in every deck and, proxy it. It's all play group specific, but yeah, these are obviously S tier lands.
Yeah. Depending on what my budget looks like when I'm at MagicCon Vegas, I might actually bite the bullet and buy a Tundra just because my band's called Tundra. It would be cool to own a real one, but we'll see. I remember seeing eyeball on a couple at vendors when I was out there last year, so we'll see. We'll see.
Nice.
I might finally do it. All right, next up we have Shockland. So these are like the second child to the uh OG duels. They're basically the same, except if you want them to enter untapped, you have to pay 2 life. I love these. I think they're auto includes in basically all decks. I think there's an argument to make that you could play all 10 of them in a 5-color deck. I think maybe that's not your perfect build, but that's a near perfect build. I give these an S, and then Jason and Preston both gave them an A.
Yeah, so for me, these are A tier lands because I mean they're fantastic. They have the ability to enter untapped for a cost, and they're fetchable because they have the land types. Um, but I think sometimes that 2 life is going to matter a little bit more than you might think. Also, there's going to be enough times where you just don't need to pay the life to have them enter untapped. Like if you play them as your first land for the turn and you want to cast your Soul Ring, that's one reason. But if it's your second land on your second turn, or it's your first land on your second turn, and nobody else at the table has really done a whole lot, and you don't have anything to do with that mana anyways, either on that turn or on somebody else's turn as a response to something, you can leave them untapped and it's fine. And at that point, they just become about as good as a guild gate, you know?
Well, they're still
So
fetchable though.
yeah, but I'm saying in that scenario where you're playing them and you're leaving it
Mm-hmm.
tapped, it's essentially the same thing. So I think that they're at A tier because they're fetchable and because they have the ability to enter untapped. But I don't know if I would put them in S tier just because you don't necessarily always need them to enter untapped, and you're not always going to pay for them to enter untapped.
Yeah, that's fair. Is that why is the life paying adding up why you have them as an A, Preston?
Yeah, like so for me in my 5-color deck, I do play all 10 of them, but I also play all 10 of the check lands, so they work really well together.
Right.
As we'll get to those later. So I do like those together, but if you weren't going to play the check lands in a 5-color deck, uh, paying all that life for all these lands can definitely add up. I have seen people take like half their life total out in 5-color decks with their shock lands before, and a lot of them tend to lose. So
Well, yeah,
I
I mean
like the
we
shock lands, but they can definitely backfire if you're not careful with them.
yeah, people joke that modern's actually a 15 life format because people are shocking and like fetching and shocking so much. And that's kind of true. If you like build like an optimal quote unquote 5-color commander deck and you run all 10 fetches, all 10 shocks, that's a lot of life. So I do run all. Oh, actually, I don't think I do anymore. I run 8 or 9 shocks in my 5-color group hug deck, but Kenris the commander, so late game I can actually gain a lot of that life back. Um, so that's why I would say maybe in 5-color, maybe you don't run literally all 10 of them, but you can make the argument. All right, next up we have bounce land. So for example, we have Simic Growth Chamber. They come into the battlefield tapped. When they come into play, you return a land you control to its owner's hand, and they tap for this one taps specifically for a green and a blue. There's one of these for all 10 of the guilds from Ravnica, and there's also 2 bounce lands that are colorless, and then there's also bounce lands that are really, really bad that only we're not even going to get into those actually. We're going to really just talk about these dual land ones, the ones that tap for multiple colors. I gave this an A, and then Jason and Preston gave them Bs. Real quick, I guess I would say A because I can only run so many of them in my decks because that's a lot of bouncing lands back, like having to discard down to hand size, right? Because you didn't do anything on turn 1, turn 2, having to play this early game, that kind of sucks. So you can't run too many of them in your decks, but I like having some number of them because they are kind of ramp if you think about it. It guarantees you're going to hit your next land. It is a land that taps for 2 colors. It's a really good way to guarantee you're hitting your landfall synergies, and it's a good way to get back your channel lands and your MDFC lands and stuff like that if you have to play those earlier in the game. So I really like these. I play some number of them in most of my decks.
See, I said B tier because sometimes, and this more goes towards what you're mulliganing to. But I've seen in plenty of games where people will play a land on their opening turn, and then their second turn they play a bounce land, have to bounce that land back to their hand, and now they have to discard, which that's always a feel bad. Also, the land entering tapped every time and doesn't not having the ability to enter untapped, it just kind of feels bad. Because it almost feels like you're wasting a land drop. And I know that you're still ahead on mana because you're returning a land to your hand and then putting, a land that can tap for 2 onto the battlefield. Um, but it just also it can kind of limit the plays that you can make.
Mhm.
The utility of it and being able to return like those channel lands or like the modal dual face lands to your hand, so you can get the other use out of that land. That's nice, but it's too situational for me to, you know, consider this to be an A tier or anything higher than a B tier land. It's not You're not always going to have that in your hand when you need it. And when you do have it, it's great. But, I think most of the time you're only just going to cast this just as the land, just to get mana.
Preston?
Yeah, so for me, these are, if I want another dual land on a decent budget, I'll throw them in some of my decks. But I really like them for the landfall decks specifically because they can bounce themselves. Because sometimes with landfall decks, you just run out of lands to play, and then your deck doesn't do anything. It's one of the only times you want to top deck land. So having one that you can play every single turn,
Mhm.
I always really love that. That always feels really nice. So I like them for a lot for that reason. But if you're not doing that, they can be kind of bad. So that's why I only
Yeah.
gave them a B.
So you guys
And
don't
here's
agree
the
with me with the channel lands and MDFCs and stuff?
I did say that I think that that's nice utility to have, but you're not going to use it that way in every single game because you're
Sure.
just not going to have the card in your hand when you
Yeah,
need
yeah.
it every single game. And the thing about it too is monocolor decks can't use these. 2-color decks they're perfect. 3-color decks they're really good. 4-color decks,
Yeah, they get kind of
there's
sus in 4 and
value.
5, yeah.
But 5-color decks, if you're running these bounce lands and you're not running like a landfall strategy, I think that that's a mistake.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have the Tango lands. So these are the fetchable dual lands from Battle for Zendikar. Did you guys know that these used to be like $15? That's crazy now that they're like 20 cents. They enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. I gave these a B. Jason gave them an A, and Preston gave them an S. So this is where we are starting to drift a little bit further. I think they're B because you have to be playing a decent amount of basics in order to guarantee that they come in untapped. Which if you're playing a 2-color deck, then sure, that's pretty easy. If you're playing a 3-color deck, that's probably still doable. But 4 or 5-color decks, that's super sus. And also worth mentioning that these are only available for the ally color pair. They don't have them for the enemy color pairs. So you can't actually, like some color combinations don't even have access to Tango lands, which is a huge downside. But why are you guys higher on them than I am?
You should not have a hard time getting 2 basics onto your battlefield. You should run more basics if you're having a hard time getting these at 10 or tapped.
Well, okay, so for example, I have Prairie Streams in my Jeskai deck. Um and it's fine in there. I have I think 12, 13 basics in that deck. Uh and I feel like that's appropriate for a Jeskai deck. I'm not running anything that specifically cares about basics. But even then, you just have chance. Magic the Gathering is a game of chance and randomness, and sometimes even if you have a decent amount of basics in your deck, you just won't draw them.
So to me, I just they're A tier because yes, you should have enough basics for them to enter untapped. But I can't put them in S tier like Preston just because, like Morgan said, 4 and 5 color decks they become 5 color decks especially they become less consistent. And I mean, if you're just gonna fall back on run more basic lands, then I think that you're looking at deck building from a very narrow perspective. And once you get into 4 and 5 colored decks, I think that there is a lot more use that you're going to get out of certain non-basics that'll either tap for the colors that you need. Like if your deck runs more of one color than the other, make sure you get that color out. But then also is going to provide you some other utility. So I think that just, like run more basics and these will be fine. I think that that's a little bit of a weak argument here. Also, the fact that there is no enemy color pairings for these definitely drops them out of S tier for me because they can't go into every deck. There's certain decks that like literally can't run any of them.
Yeah, I would
And
totally run an
that's
Orzhov
that's
in Orzhov Tango land if that existed, but it
and
doesn't
that's
exist.
just and that's like not the case for almost any of these other lands on this list that we're going to talk about. Like there's almost I can't put them in S tier, but they are really good, so I do have them in A tier.
Well, and I could
I,
see the
I,
argument for A, but saying that they're S tier along with like the OG duels and stuff
Yeah,
just
no,
seems
that
kind of
just
ridiculous.
it shouldn't be in the same tier as those lands.
Yeah, having them at S is a little sus, but well, that does
the
average out
fact
to
that
an
we don't
A.
have all
So
10 could the fact we don't have all 10 could bring me down to an A, but no, you guys just need to run more basics.
I run plenty of
That's a
basics,
skill issue, to
Preston.
be honest.
Look at that win percentage and tell me if I need to run more basics.
I,
You
I
don't
run
count.
I run plenty of basics, Preston. Next up, we have fast lands. So these are lands that they come into the battlefield tapped late in the game, but they come in untapped early game. So, for example, we have Blooming Marsh. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. Taps for a black or a green. And we do have all of these. There is one of these for all 10 color pairs. I gave this a C. Jason gave it a C, and Preston gave it an F. I'm sure Jason's on the same boat as me as if you're a combo deck or you're trying to go aggro, go really fast, and those first couple turns mean a lot to you. These are pretty good. But if you're not that, they're not very good because a lot of the time on the casual ends of Commander, the first couple turns don't matter that much. So then having a land that always enters the battlefield tapped late in the game that's not even fetchable kind of stinks. So that's why I gave it a C.
Yeah, I don't think that you run a lot of these in a deck. Even if you are trying to go fast and get things out, like you may run a couple, but I don't think that you need to run more than 2 in a
Yeah.
deck. And then most decks aren't really going to need these because they're not really going to be doing a whole lot in the early turns. So I think that there are definitely better land options, but when you have it turn 1 and it basically is just, an OG dual land at that point, kind of.
Right. Yeah.
It just feels really nice to have. And there's definitely certain decks that are gonna want this. If you're running a deck where Amulet of Vigor is a big part of what you're doing, then these
Sure.
are fine. Um, but yeah, they're not good enough to be in most decks.
Yeah, I've never actually put them in a commander deck. I was just thinking like brainstorming wise, I could see a reason to run them. But Preston, why specifically are they an F for you?
I'm sorry that you have to do more editing, Jason, but these are dog shit in Commander. These are unplayable in Commander. CDH, maybe they're super important lands, go for it. In Commander, you should not be playing these lands. Save the extra dollar or two, play a basic. That's genuinely better deck building.
They're actually pretty cheap. They are all 10 of them are actually standard legal right now. Half of them got reprinted in, I believe, Phyrexia All Will Be One, and then the other half got reprinted in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So there's a lot more of them in circulation, and they're not that expensive. But yeah, to Preston's point, that all makes enough sense to me. This averages out to be our first C of the day. All right, next up we have the Battle Bond land. So we do also have. Wait, no, that's not what's next. Next, excuse me. Next up we have the slow lands. So these are kind of the opposite of the fast lands. We got half of these in each of the new Innistrad sets, respectively. So, for example, we have Shipwreck Marsh. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for a blue or a black. So, turn 1, turn 2, they come in the battlefield tapped. Then the rest of the game, they come in untapped. I really like these.
Wait. I got confused on which ones these were. I had to change my ranking.
Would you
I
change
thought
it to?
because I thought these were the ones that were just the basics. Like they see other basics.
No. So I think we're actually, yeah, we're A's across the board on this. I love these. I think as far as the non-fetchable duels, this is my favorite.
Yeah, for sure. These are the best non-fetchable dual lands out there. It's like maybe not for Commander specifically, but as far as like just across all formats, like yeah, these are really, really, really good. If you can play them, play them. The fact that it's just any land, it'll see any other land. It's really, really nice.
Yeah. Well, and like in opposition to the fast lands that we just talked about, like the first couple turns in most commander games aren't that important. Like if you're slow balling a little bit, those turns 1 through 3, not a big deal. But then a dual land that guarantees comes in untapped the rest of the game when those things do start to matter in casual commander, that's big deal. Yeah. Anything else to add to that, Preston?
Yeah, no, I think if they are within budget, because they are what, all around $10-ish, I think.
They
Like
vary a little bit, but
10 to
yeah,
so.
somewhere around there. Yeah.
So for budget reasons, I would never put them at S. But and they don't have like the land types. That is a noticeable thing about them, but they're still very good. Absolutely A tier.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Definitely plopping them into our A tier. Okay. Now we are talking about the battle bond land. So, for example, we have Sea of Clouds. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Taps for a white or a blue. We do have all 10 of these as well. I gave them a B, Jason gave them an S, and Preston gave them an S. So to defend my answer, maybe they're actually more comparable to slow lands than I give them credit for. However, I would rather play a slow land because I'd rather have a land that late game I know is going to enter untapped instead of this where a lot of the time it will enter untapped, but towards the end of the game, you're in top deck mode. It's you versus the last player. It's a lot more cutthroat. Or could you win this? And then you top deck this and it's a tapped land. That kind of stinks, especially because they're not cheap. They are, somewhere in the $10-ish range. So I'd rather play a slow land, something that I know late game is going to enter untapped. So I run these in 2-color decks, and then outside of that, I rarely run them.
I think for Commander, these lands are actually perfect. That's why I put them in S tier, because most of the time, and I do mean most of the time that you play these, they're going to enter untapped. And simply because you are playing Commander, that's really what it is. These are really good turn 1, and even in the late game, like I really doubt that if you're in the late game situation where it's just you and one other player. I mean, I really doubt that most of the time in those situations, 1 extra mana is going to put you over the edge. There's
Oh, come on,
definitely
Jason.
going to
You've
be.
never said if only I had 1 more mana. You've never said that.
Yeah,
There's
we've all said
definitely
it, but
gonna
it's not
be.
always true.
There's definitely situations where 1 more mana will allow you like a path to victory. But most of the time in those situations when you're top decking against 1 player, you're looking for like either a kill spell,
Mhm.
a board wipe, a counter spell, something like like some type of spell that's going to be of value and affect the way that the game plays out, as opposed to just a land that's going to give you another mana. I think that most of the times you're going to be looking for, you know, the spell as opposed to the land. So I think that they're S tier because even when they're bad, they enter tapped. It's probably not going to be the thing that breaks the game for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Preston, you
didn't
also had
lose
these as
because you
an
hit a
S.
tap. Yeah, you didn't lose because you hit a tap land. You lost because you hit a land. That is the big reason I think these are S tier in Commander.
All right. Well, I think even though I'm a little bit lower on them, I think this still averages them out to an S, like bottom of S. I think that's how that works. So yeah, I guess no one cares about these sweaty plays. Next up we have uh bicycle lands. These are like baby triomes. These are from Amonkhet. So, for example, we have Scattered Groves. It's a forest and a plain, so it's fetchable. Enters the battlefield tapped always, but you can cycle them for 2 mana. So, yeah, like baby triomes. And unfortunately, these are like the Tango lands where we only have the ally color combinations. We don't have the enemy ones. I feel like eventually they'll happen, but they have been reprinted in precons and stuff, so they are very cheap. Again, they're fetchable. I think they're decent. I put them as B. I don't love them, but they're fine. They're fine. And then Jason had them as an A, and Preston also had them at a B.
So I think that they're better than just a B tier land because of the cycling. They'll always enter tapped, but they are fetchable and they'll provide you some late game value outside of just being a land that enters tapped. That's, I think that having that late game value is so important because just like we were talking about a second ago with the battle bond lands, if you draw this off the top of your library and it's just you and one player and you're trying to find something that's going to put you over the edge,
It's
you're
a
not just
redraw.
stuck with that card
Yeah.
as a land. Yeah, you get another draw. And I think that that's going to provide you with a lot more value than just, having a land in your hand that doesn't really do anything because it's going to enter tapped and you can't use it right away. So, you know, when you think about evaluating cards throughout the stages of the game. Is this card good in the early game? Yeah, it's good because it's going to help you fix your mana. Is it good in the mid game? It's not as good, but it's still going to give you some mana and it's going to help you with any fixing that you might be struggling with. And you can also use that cycling ability in the mid game to look for another card or trigger some ability or do whatever. And then in the late game, it's going to provide you with a lot more value than just being a land that enters tap. So that's why I put them in A tier.
Yeah. Anything else to add to that, Preston?
So I was definitely like right there on the edge. Could have been B, could have been an A. Like I kept going back and forth. But the two reasons I went with B are one, we only have 5 of them, and two, I think these are less important auto includes for a 2-color deck than the triomes are for a 3-color deck to me. Like if I build a 3-color deck, I'm gonna add the appropriate triome. If I have a 2-color deck, I might run this. Like they're
Yeah.
good, but they're not like I am going to run this in my 2-color deck for me. So
That's a
that's
good
why I
point.
put it as B. But very much one of those ones I could go either way. If when we get all 10 of them, I probably would bump it up to an A just for, you know,
I think
it's
that's
nice to have the full cycle. But
I think that's fair. I think that's kind of where I'm at. I think I would often play these in 2-color decks, but we have so many. Look at all these other dual lands that we've talked about that we're like, oh yeah, that's an S, or oh yeah, that's an A. You you need to have some basics. You need to have some utility lands that fit your theme, you know? So I'll play them often in 2-color decks, but I'm not running to do so. And when we move to 3 to 5 color decks, I'm less likely to play them. Next up, I actually feel similarly about these. We have the check lands. So they will enter the battlefield tapped unless you have one of their respective land types. So, for example, we have Dragon Skull Summit, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a mountain, taps for a red or a black. I kind of felt like the same way about these as the bicycle lands, as far as like they're good, but we have so many other good dual lands that like I need to do a double take before I auto include these in 2-color decks. And then they go down in value in 4 and 5-color decks just because you're going to have so many other, lands that you're not guaranteed that your dual lands are all going to check this. You're not guaranteed to have the basics, because even your basics will let this enter on tap. So I think they're auto include in 2-color decks, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm changing my opinion. Maybe it's like bottom of A. I think I like these more than the bicycle lands, but um yeah, that's where I landed on them. What about you guys?
So I have them in S because these are some of the best budget options you have in for duels. Like they're under $1. They've been reprinted a ton of times. There's a couple alternate art versions, so you can pick out your favorites if you're willing to spend a little more, or you can just go with the really cheap ones. So
Which is
these are
crazy.
just
There was a while
fantastic.
where these were not budget. So it is cool
Yeah,
that
no.
they're budget now.
So to me, these are A tier lands because in 2-color decks, so the way that I looked at these when I was thinking about it, I was like, in 2-color decks, these are S tier lands. In 3-color decks, these are S tier lands. In 4-color decks and 5-color decks, like 4-color decks, they drop down to an A tier for me, but then in 5-color decks, they drop down to a B tier because in a 5-color deck, the odds that you're going to have one of the 2 land types that it's checking for, it's just not going to be as consistent. In a 4-color deck, you'll find more of that consistency, but still not as much as you'd like. But in 3-color decks and 2-color decks, you should be fairly consistent with letting these enter untapped. So, 2-color decks, 3-color decks, they're S tier. 4-color decks and 5-color decks, they're just not good enough to be an S tier for me. So that's why I put them in A.
As I was
I
talking
never
out
really have
loud,
trouble.
go ahead, Preston.
I was gonna say these and the shock lands are what I play for my 5-color deck, and I almost never have problems with my lands.
That's
Like
that's personal thing. That's just you and the way that you built the deck and the way that you constructed your mana base. I mean,
That used
it's
to be like
not going to
the
be
the move for
universal.
like budget, like modern decks, is like you play all the shocks and you play all of the checks and you're good to go, man. Like that used to be like how you could build a good budget mana base in modern. As I was talking out loud and getting my thoughts out, I actually decided I like them more than the bicycle land. So that averages that out to an A instead of I think they were going to be an A anyways, but yeah.
And here's the other thing about them: they're not fetchable. So it's
That's
just
true. That's true. They are not fetchable, which the bicycle lands are, but I think I talked myself into liking them more. All right. Next up, we have the reveal lands slash snarls. So these are dual lands that will enter the battlefield tapped unless you reveal one of their corresponding basic types. Oh, they don't have to be basic, just a land. So for example, we have Frostboil Snarl. So it's a land that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal an island or mountain, not basic specifically, just any island or mountain. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for a blue or a red. We got the first half of these in Shadows over Innistrad, and the other half of them in Strixhaven. I hate these. I've tried playing them in decks before, and even in 2-color decks, they don't work. So I gave it an F. Jason gave it a B, and then Preston gave it a D. So Preston, you seem to be somewhere around the same place as me. Jason, why so high on them?
I mean, Preston, correct me if I'm wrong, but like if you can't make this work in a 2-color deck, maybe you just don't build decks well, right? Like I just in a 2-color deck you can't get these to work. I've never had a problem with playing these lands ever. And honestly, revealing a basic land, which is what I'm doing most of the time,
Yeah.
revealing a basic land to my opponents, I don't care. I'll tell you I have a basic in my hand before revealing it. Like even if I don't have this, I'll tell you if I have a basic in my hand. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. How much information is that really going to give you in an average game of Commander? I don't think that that's exposing a whole lot of information in an average game of Commander.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that these, while they aren't that A tier, shock land or the check land, I think that they're still good enough that you could run them in an average Commander deck.
So the thing about these is if you get them in your opening hand, it's a fantastic land. But when you've already played all the lands out of your hand and you are drawing it for your turn, it's always entering tapped. That's why they're so bad. If they're not in your opening hand, these are a terrible. They don't have the land types. They will always enter the battlefield tapped. Like they're just not good. They
Terrible
are
and
only
not good. That is that is that's just so
they're
wrong.
unplayable.
Well,
That's
I mean,
so
Jason, you wouldn't
incorrect. Unplayable. That is such a
but
stretch.
okay, so I could see the argument that like on a budget you could maybe play this in a 2-color deck, but you would never play it in 3 to 5 colors, right? Like even on a budget,
In three color decks, you could probably
even if you're
play
on a
it.
strict budget, you have better options than this, right?
In 3-color decks, you could probably run this. In 4 and 5-color decks, I wouldn't run this. But that's why I put it in B tier.
Yeah. All right. So that averages out to wow, I lost my spot on the dock. A D. So yeah, I actually feel like these are the most extreme example of why I'm sussed out by the Battle Bond lands. Like the Battle Bond lands are actually like playable. I will play them. I won't play these because I don't like the unknown. I like knowing that if I draw this late game, it's going to enter untapped for sure. But all right, next up we have the Surveil lands. These are pretty neat. These are actually very new. We got all 10 of them from Murders at Karlov Manor. For example, we have Lush Portico, which is a forest plane. So these are fetchable. They always enter the battlefield tapped, but when they do, you surveil one. Reminder, that means you look at the top card of your library and you may put it back on top or put it into your graveyard. So little bit of card selection there as well. And these do also have very pretty full art versions as well. I remember when we did the episode for our favorite cards of that set that I was like, oh yeah, these will be a good budget land. They're not budget, guys. They it turns out everyone was like, oh, these are actually playable in other formats. So they're actually not budget, but they are very good. We had A's across the board. Oh wait, Preston has a B. Uh
Yeah.
Preston, why are you on at a B with them?
Uh, well, that budget is a big reason. I just don't think these are good enough to justify how much you have to spend for them. Like, it's a land that is always going to enter untapped, and surveilling one is nice, but not revolutionary in a game of Commander. Like, it's just not going to be that impactful for a land that costs you 15, 10, $5, depending on which one you're playing. Like, the cheapest of these is $5, and the most expensive is like 15. So, I just don't think they're worth that price for what they offer.
Here's the thing that I don't think that you're considering. They're not going to stay at this price forever. These are lands that they are for sure 100% going to reprint at some point. Um, and they're just going to provide you with so much value. I mean, first of all, you can fetch them. That's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that I'm going to base all these lands on is, are they fetchable? These are 100% fetchable. And it provides you with card advantage. Like at the very least, card selection. You know, you'll be able to shape what's on top, or at least know what's on top, so you can prepare for what's happening next. And then, if you pair these with the bounce lands and you're able to return one or two of them to your hand and get that surveil again, that's going to be pretty good because you're going to get more value. Also, there are plenty of decks out there that want cards in your graveyard, and that this is a way for you to add cards to your graveyard. Um, I don't think that they're necessarily worth the price that you're paying for them, but I think that they're still good enough, even at the price point that they're at, to be A tier lands. And honestly, you don't even need to spend this much on them. Like I've pulled plenty of these out of packs, and I know I have pretty good luck with packs, but I feel like that they're pretty. I feel like that they got printed enough that you could probably just pull one in an average pack.
Yeah, part of why they're expensive is because it was a unpopular set. People did not like Murders at Karlov Manor, and it's a very popular card from a very unpopular set, so that's why they're expensive. So I agree with Jason's point about graveyard decks. When these were previewed, I pre-ordered like 5 of them because I really like graveyard decks, and these I think you put in all your graveyard decks because you're like surveil one, cool. That means a card I could be throwing in my graveyard with a land drop, a fetchable land drop at that. But these are good in Commander for the same reason that they're good in Modern, which is that you play some number of these and some number of shocks, and you play your fetch land, you don't need to do anything right now. You pass the turn. If you end up needing that mana, you fetch and you shock in a shock land, or you grab a basic and you do something with that mana. And then if it gets back to your turn, you didn't need that mana, you crack your fetch and you grab a surveil land. You get a little bit of card selection. It's pretty sweet. So I'm pretty high on these. Yeah, averages out to an A. Boop. And
When
we'll
they
continue
do
on.
start getting reprinted and go down in price, I would bump them up to an A. I just, for now, I'm not willing to give them anything higher. But
Yeah,
when they are more affordable, I'll definitely join you guys in the A land.
sounds good. We'll be looking forward to you joining us. Next up, we have ones that I've been back and forth on over the years. These are the pain lands. So these are lands that they always enter untapped. They tap for a colorless, or they can tap for one of the colors if you will deal 1 damage to yourself. For example, we have Lion War Waste. And if you tap it for a black or a green, it deals 1 damage to you. And we do have these for all 10 color combinations. Um, they're pretty cool. You can pretty painlessly run them in your 2 color decks because they will always enter untapped. You probably only have to tap if you play them early game. You'll probably only have to ping yourself once or twice, and then you can tap them for colorless for the rest of the game. That's basically a shock land. That's even better late game. But then if you start running more of them, it can potentially be more painful. So then you would want to be a deck that cares specifically about losing life, or a deck that specifically gains a lot of life, so it balances out, not a big deal. And they're not fetchable. So I have them as a B, but I almost put them as an A. The only reason I didn't is because, like I said, we have a big list of other A tier lands at this point. So that's why it's down here as a B for me. Jason has them as a B as well. Preston has them as a C.
Yeah, I put these a little lower just because I don't like them. Like if I was a bit more objective, I might put them in a B, but I'm just never gonna run these. Like there's so many dual land options. I don't need one that pings me every time I want to use it as a dual land.
But it always taps for colorless without hurting you.
Yeah, but that's math, and there's a couple lands on here where once you start making me do more math, I'm just gonna rank you lower.
I know which ones you're talking about. Anything to
Yeah.
add about these, Jason?
So I think that paying 1 life for the color that you need is pretty inconsequential in Commander, and I don't think that you're going to be doing that a whole lot because, like you said, Morgan, once you get to a certain point, you can tap it for colorless the rest of the game. But
Yep.
also, this is a format where Urborg and Yavimaya are really, really heavily played.
True.
So there's going to be plenty of times where this is going to tap for a color, and you don't need to pay life. It's not guaranteed to be a color that you need, but the fact that that's definitely that's going to happen enough times in Commander games where paying that 1 life isn't going to be something that you actually need to do. But also using your life as a resource is something that every Commander player knows and understands is a really powerful thing to do. And so just paying 1 life to make sure that you get the color that you need when you need it doesn't seem like too hefty a price to pay.
Is it
But
blasphemous to say that if you don't care about the fetchability, that these are better than shocklands in 2 color decks?
yes, that's blasphemous because you activate it 3 times. Now you've just paid 3 life instead of 2 for your
Yeah, but
shock
you
land.
probably don't have to do that. You probably only have to do it once or twice, and then late game it guarantees enters untapped still. Whereas the shocklands you will have to pay the life, and you don't need.
Yeah, but now here's the thing. If for some reason you're restricted from paying that 1 life, like if you need to save as much life as you can, but you also need that color,
Mhm.
you're now prevented from doing that based on the way that the game is played out. Whereas the shock land, you pay 2 life 1 time, and now it'll tap for a color the rest of the game.
True.
Yeah.
One last note about the pain lands is that they also, if you care about the colorless specifically, like you're an Eldrazi deck, that is upside as well. But that's pretty niche. Okay, next up we have the gain lands / the refuge lands. These are lands that enter the battlefield tapped, and when they do, you gain a life, and then they tap for one of their colors. They have these ones that are like Bloodfell Caves, which there's a full cycle of, all 10 of them. And then there's also the refuge cycle, which is another half cycle of the allied color pair. So depending on your color combination, you might have 2 of these available to you. I put these at C. I think they're if you are a life gain deck, they're fine. Outside of that, I don't think I'd play them. Jason has them as a D. Preston also has them as a C.
Yeah, even in a life gain deck, I really don't want to play these lands. I mean, 1 life, and it just doesn't seem worth it to me just to get 1 life out of it for having a land enter tapped. It's not fetchable. There's no condition where it will enter untapped without the effects of another card. So I there's just no scenario where I will play this.
Well, in a life gain deck, it doesn't matter how much life you're gaining, you just care about activating a life gain effect. And putting that on a land is pretty nice. So they are you are supposed to run them in a life gain deck because you'll trigger 15 cards on the battlefield. But outside of that, yeah, I just don't play these anymore. I used
Are you
to when I first started, but nowadays I just don't unless I'm playing life gain.
are you supposed to play them in a life gain deck? A lot of these colors are not life gain oriented.
Well,
So I
sure,
just
but it's nice to have the
Well,
option,
that's
right?
what
Like
I'm
the
saying. If you're playing a deck that cares about life gain, it has a bunch of life gain effects. You
you
play the
play the
ones
ones
that are
available to
with
you.
for your colors. Yeah.
right. And I think that that limitation and that limited use as far as like where to maximize the value of these cards, that's not enough for me to put it in a C tier.
All right. So those
Well,
average
yeah,
out
you're
to a
probably not
C.
using the Demir one, but
Yeah.
the
Yeah, there's not
Selesnya
really a lot
one,
of
that's
yeah,
pretty
the
good.
Selesnya one,
Especially
yeah,
because
for sure.
there's two
Yeah, right.
for Selesnya because it's one of the allies.
Still averages out to a C. And then next up we have Guild Gates. These enter the battlefield tapped. They tap for one of their respective colors, and they have the subtype Gate. I gave these a C, and Jason and Preston gave them Ds. They actually used to put these suckers in precons, which is offensive to me. The one defense I give of these is that gate decks are kind of cool. There is the Maze's End win con, if you play a bunch of gates, and then there's also a couple gate payoffs and stuff from Boulder's Gate. And if you're playing, I think it's Nine Fingers is that commander. It's like a if you're playing one of those kind of strategies, that's kind of fun. But if you're not doing that literal thing, don't play these.
That's
Maze's
kind
End
of
used to
my
be cool, but it's kind of lame now. Like
it's
it's just
kind of
been done so many times.
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of my same thought process that I had with the gain lands. Like just because there's a couple of different types of decks that really like these, it's not good enough to be anywhere near a C tier. So I put it in D tier
But
because
that was what we defined a C tier as. We said that C tier is only for certain decks. That's what we defined C tier as.
let's narrow the gates down more. Only for one type of
Yeah,
deck. One type. No, they're not good. If you play one guild gate in a deck, I'm just gonna be like, oh, that's just the land that they had. They didn't spend money on their mana base. That's fine. But if you're running like 4, 5, 6 gates and they're on the battlefield, I'm like, you're playing to Maze's End, aren't you? And now I'm gonna have to kill you before you get there. So
and you're using terrible lands, you're gonna get bodied.
yeah, um, they're not good.
Yeah, it does average out to a D. My C does not save it. So next up we have an oldie but a old reliable goodie, the Scry lands. So we have one of these for all 10 color combinations. For example, we have Temple of Abandon. Enters the battlefield tapped, tapped for red or green, and when it enters, you scry 1. I used to play these a lot, like in multiple, like I maybe have played these in 4 and 5 color decks. I know I've played them in most of my 2 color decks over the years. I've played them in 3 color decks at certain points, but they have fallen out of favor for me because being fetchable has gone up in value to me, and they always enter tapped. Scry 1 is really not that big of a deal. I feel like you can still probably play these in most 2 color decks, but I feel like you can't really play them anywhere else anymore just because the formats changed so much in recent years. So I put them as a B. Jason also has them as a B, and Preston has them as a C.
We all just went one grade lower than the Surveil lands, which I think is appropriate for how you rank them. Scrying is weaker than Surveil, and they don't have the fetchable land type.
That's a good point. They are kind of like the precursor to Surveil lands.
I do think that the Scrylands hold some value because they gives you card selection. You know, you can make sure, or at least try your best to make sure that you don't draw another land when you need something that's going to do something more to the game.
Sure.
Or, you know, if you need a land, you can hopefully maybe get to a land by putting a spell onto the bottom of your library. You never know. And so I think that because you get some card selection from it, that card selection is going to help you early game, mid game, and late game. I think that they're worthy of a B tier.
Yeah, and it does
There's
average out
also a
to
couple
a B.
cards. There's a couple cards that reward you for scrying, but that is kind of niche. So
Yeah, yeah.
that didn't bump it much for me. I just wanted to point that out.
Also,
Yeah,
I
but I
think
don't
if you
think you
build a
necessarily
Scry
play
Matters
these
deck, isn't
just
that mono
because
blue? Or am I misremembering?
I mean, you have to run at least one more color so you can play these probably, but
Yeah.
And I don't think that you necessarily run these just because, you know, it's going to synergize with the other scry stuff. It's just another way to get
oh
card
yeah, no.
selection without having to spend a ton of money on a land.
Yeah. And like I said, I still kind of like these in two color decks, but I think we're sadly getting to a point where even two color decks, I probably don't play these anymore at some point in the near future, but we'll see. Next up we have the pathways. We got these from, oh my god, I forgot. Zendikar Rising and the other half
Kaldheim.
from Kaldheim. So for example, we have Crag Crown Pathway. They always enter untapped, and then they're MDFCs. So they have a front and back. For example, Crag Crown Pathway on the front side taps for a red, and on the back side it taps for a green. I had a very brief period of time where I thought these were auto include in two color decks, and I flip flopped because what ends up happening is that you play these on one side because that's the color you need that turn, but then the next turn or at another point later in the game, you wish you had a different color. So I'm at the point where I actually wouldn't play these almost ever, and I have them as a D, which is maybe harsh, but that's how far I've fallen on them. Jason has them as an A, and then Preston has them as a C.
Jason, you talk first because you actually like them.
So the fact that it's going to give you an ability to choose which color you get, I think that that's really helpful during certain parts of the game. You know, if and I think that if you play this for one color and then you're just stuck without the other color for the rest of the game, you need to reevaluate how you built your mana
Well,
base
it's not that you're
because
stuck without it for the rest of the game. It's just, if you want to like Seagate Restoration and then follow it up with, I don't know, something that's another color more intense, like if you have a lot of pips that you're worried about.
I think these cards will work more times than they won't work. That's kind of why I have them as an A. Also, they will never enter tapped unless somebody else has something that makes them enter tapped. Um, you'll always have access to the color the turn you play it. So, you know, one thing that a lot of these dual lands don't do is enter untapped. And so the fact that you can say, I need this color more on my turn than this color, and you'll have access to it. I don't know. I just like the ability to choose and any land that's going to give me some more options, I'm always going to feel better about, especially when it enters untapped.
I guess in your defense, it also does my super uber powerful bounce lands can bounce these back to your hand to flip them to the other side if you really need to. Preston, did you have anything to add about these?
If these were cheaper, I might be willing to give them a B, but
Wait, are they
there's too
expensive?
many times. They're not expensive, but $5 for a land that only taps one of your colors. That
Sure.
just feels kind of bad. It's not. They're not viable for people who build on budgets, really. So if we get them reprinted and they go down, I'll probably bump them up to a B. But right now I just feel like they miss enough for me where I don't really want to play them outside of 2-color. And even then, they're not mandatory for me.
Fair enough. All right, that averages out to a C rating for these bad boys. Now we get into a weird one. These are the filter lands. We actually have two filter lands. We're going to talk about the good ones first. These are uh, lands that always enter tapped. They tap for a colorless, or if you put a color into them, they can, well, filter your mana. For example, we have Flooded Grove. Enters the battlefield untapped, taps for a colorless, or if you pay green or a blue, you can tap it to add green, 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 blue, or blue, blue. So it's not ramping you, but it is letting you, if you need to be more specific about your casting costs, lets you get there. And if you don't, it taps for a colorless, which is not nothing. And they always enter the battlefield untapped. I have these as a B. If I was playing these in a 2-color deck, I'd feel fine about it. I don't know if I'd go out of my way to get these, but if I have them lying around, I would play these in 2-color decks. Jason has them as an A. Preston has them as an F. Preston, why so
I don't actually think
harsh?
they're F, but again, you make me start doing too much math with my lands. I'm just going to put you in F because I don't like you. These
Oh,
and the Odyssey ones are both an F for me. I just don't like having to do math. I don't think they're good enough to justify that. Like Commander, like you already have to spend so much time thinking about stuff. I don't need that in my very, very okay at best land. I'd rather just play an untapped duel, or I mean a tap duel,
Jason,
any
say
other
something
tap
nice about
duel.
these lands, please. Please.
That was the most mind-numbing explanation I've ever heard in my life.
I
You
know what you mean, Preston,
what
but it hurts.
really, really, really turning one into two. That's too much for you. These lands are never going to enter tapped, and you don't even need to activate them for the color. You could just tap it for a colorless if you just need another mana. But then it also gives you the ability to filter your mana into either the 2 colors that you need or one of each color. And that is incredibly helpful in a lot of situations because sometimes you just don't have enough pips on the board as far as like what your lands can produce in order to pay for the pips and the spells that you're casting. This gets you closer to that because not very often are you going to be casting something that has more than 3 pips of a certain color in it. And when you do, having this land out there is going to it's going to help with that so much. But then even for just the standard ones that have more than 1 pip, these lands are fantastic because if anything, it makes the math easier because you could say, I'll pay 1 to make 2 blue and I'll use that 2 blue for this. And then I can pay whatever else I want into the remaining 4 or 3 or whatever the generic cost is. That was such,
It
these
is kind
lands
of
are
funny
See,
because
that's it.
Jason really likes these, and he plays them on our gameplay series a lot. And he'll be like, "I'm gonna tap this to tap this, and use that mana to," and that gets kind of silly when I'm editing. I'm like, "Oh, come on!" But I mean, Jason's completely right. Like all of that angst that I just felt about pathways, this fixes it. I understand Preston's complaint about brain capacity and Commander, but like, good grief. All right. Well, unfortunately, that means these are. I'm at least going to put them in top of C, just to make it less bad. But it gets worse because next we have the Odyssey filter lands, which are even worse. So we got the first half of them in Odyssey, and the other half of them we got in, I believe it was the Fallout precons. It was pretty recently that we got these. Um, so they don't do any, they always enter untapped. They don't do anything by themselves, but you can pay 1 and tap them to add one of each of your colors. So for example, Sky Cloud Expanse, you can pay 1, tap it, it will add white and a blue. I kind of hate these. I put them as a D. If I was forced to play them in a 2-color deck, I would begrudgingly do it. Like sometimes they're in precons and stuff. So, you know, if I'm playing a precon with no upgrades, I'll be like, ugh, fine. Jason's on the same boat as me. He's got them as a D, and Preston's got them as an F.
I don't like these. I'm not going to try and defend them and say that they're better than an F tier because they're bad. If you don't have any of the lands, they don't do anything. You can't even do this. You can't even use this.
Yep.
In 2-color decks, it's fine because it gives you your colors, but it doesn't even give you a whole lot of options as far as what colors you could use. You just get 1 of each color. So maybe I should have dropped it down to an F tier, but these are just not good.
Here we go, boys. I'm
I
just
don't
gonna do
like
it for
either
us. I'm
one of
just gonna
these
do it
ones.
for us. F.
Thank you.
There we
Oh.
go.
Your guys' drop off on these is weird. I don't like either version, but not tapping for one colorless mana does not seem like the biggest downgrade in the world when you get to filter out colorless mana
But
instead of
it's
colored.
also the way that you can filter it. Like this, like doesn't tap by itself, which is a downside. It's a big downside. Like it means you can't turn one Soul Ring with it. Or there's some other niche examples of why this is worse without being able to tap by itself. But then also the specific way that you filter it, like the Sky Cloud Expanse, for example, when you activate it, it only adds you one of each of your pips. Whereas the other filter
That's
lands,
fair.
the real filter lands, you can be more specific. If you have a card that's green green, you can cast it. Whereas next turn you can follow up and cast something that's blue blue. That's way better flexibility. So
It's not
to
just the
me,
fact that
it goes from something that's very good in 2-color decks to something that I would never willingly play.
it's not just the fact that the other filter lands can tap for a colorless. It's the fact they can tap for anything at all. This land can't tap for anything unless you have another land out. You can't turn one this land. You can't do it. So these are infinitely worse than the filter lands because of that. So the drop off, it makes more sense than you would
Buddy,
suggest.
buddy, calm down. I don't like them. I put them in F.
I
I'm
just
not
I just
defending 'em.
I think he's just
don't
upset that you
I
also
just
give
don't
the normal filter
understand.
lands an F.
I just don't understand how you have them in the same tier when the other filter lands are clearly better. They're just
Yeah,
clearly better.
yeah, but I don't want to do math with my lands.
And
All right,
that's a you problem, bud.
next up we
I
got.
know. That's why I ranked them that way.
All right, we're almost through. Next up we have the desert ping lands, the crime lands as people are starting to call them, from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So, for example, we have Lush Oasis, which is a desert land, enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, it deals 1 damage to target opponent, and then taps for a green or a blue. We do have these for all 10 color combinations. They were printed at common, which made limited a lot more viable in this format. Noteworthy that desert actually is somewhat relevant. There are cards that care about deserts. There's cards that let you tutor for deserts. There's cards that say when a desert does this, do this. And then there are cards that care about committing crimes. That's one of the sub themes that we saw in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. When you commit a crime, you get your payoff. This is a land that does that. Now, granted, I think that if you don't care about that, these kind of stink. So, by our definition of what a C is, that's a C. And you guys seem to agree it with me.
Not
Yeah, there's a
good.
couple decks that can use these for specific ideas, but in your average unrelated 2-color deck, there's no really reason to run these over a basic.
Completely agree. I completely agree. Run a basic land over these. That 1 damage it's not gonna matter that much.
Yeah. No running outside of crime decks or desert decks. All right. Next up, we have snow lands. So these are dual lands that are snow. Of note, I didn't catch this at first, but there are ones that are fetchable and there are ones that are not. For argument's sake, because this is what I loaded up in the tier list, we will just talk about the ones that are fetchable because they are way better because they are well fetchable. So, for example, these are from Kaldheim. Arctic Tree Line is a forest plains, taps for a green or a white, enters the battlefield tapped. So they're fetchable, but they have snow synergy. So if you have any kind of deck that is snow payoff, that's pretty niche, but it exists. And then if you just want more fetchable lands in your budget decks, I think that bumps them up. So normally I would say these are a C. I bump them up to a B because I think the green and the white ones specifically are just nice and as budget lands. So you have more fetchable budget dual lands. And then Jason and Preston had them as a C.
Them being fetchable it's a really big thing. I think another thing that you have to consider is they will help trigger Field of the Dead. Because it's a different named land. But I just think that being a snow land and entering tapped every time, it's too niche, it's too specific to be generically good in just any deck. But the decks that are going to utilize these cards, they're going to be nice for them. It triggering Field of the Dead is one of the big things for me, though.
Well, yeah, but like that's what this whole list does is Field of the Dead.
Yeah, but
Uh,
I'm saying if you're just like,
if you
well,
just
One
start
more
trying to load
landing.
up on it,
think
yeah, yeah, yeah,
think
yeah,
think
yeah.
think about building a deck with all these lands in it, dude. You're spending a lot of money just on the lands themselves. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Preston, anything to add about the Snowlands?
I mean, yeah, we already covered mostly how I feel about them. One thing that does kind of suck though is the ones without the land types look nicer to me because
Oh,
of the
like
way
their
they're
art.
formatted. Like,
That is
not
strange.
even the art. No, like having the text comes into play tapped and then tap add your mana just
Hmm.
looks nicer than the in bracket or brackets add green or white
No,
and
I
then
agree
enter
with that.
battle tapped.
I agree with
That
that.
is a very niche thing to point out. It's just something I noticed when I was looking at them.
But then the non-fetchable ones, can we agree that you wouldn't play them outside of a snow deck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So that averages out to a C. I guess we'll bump these, I don't know, somewhere in here. Doesn't really matter that much, but next up we have about the same is the Dominaria United fetchable tap land. So these are kind of the same thing. For example, Sacred Peaks. It's a mountain plains, so it taps for a red or a white, and it enters the battlefield tapped. Always. That's it. These are common, so they're basically free. These are, you know, I think they're the same as the fetchable snows, except you don't have any additional synergies like the snowlands do. So I have them as a C. Preston has them as a C. Jason has them as a D. If you want more budget fetchable lands, I think they're fine. You probably don't need them though.
Them
Yeah.
being
I think
fetchable isn't enough for me to. I just don't like them. If I had the choice, I wouldn't play these. Now I will say in the Othari deck that Tommy built for me, they these are in that deck, and I have like been able to search more than one of them onto the battlefield before. Um, but if it were up to me, I wouldn't have them in the deck. When it was built.
I think the main thing they offer is if you've already gotten the land you'd normally want to fetch, these are another dual land option. So one or two of those is like a backup in your land in your deck might make sense, but that's still pretty niche to run them. So if you do, I understand. If not, I also understand.
Yeah.
See, I would still almost rather have a basic, I think.
I probably would too, but I could see someone arguing the other way, and I wouldn't disagree with them at all, really.
I think you have to have a decent mass of reasons to want the fetchable land. Like you want your Knight of the White Orchid and all sorts of stuff like that. And eventually you run out of those, especially on a budget. So pretty niche, but we'll put this at bottom of C. Next up, we have the artifact dual lands that we got from Modern Horizons 2. They entered the battlefield tapped. They are artifact lands that are indestructible, and then they tap for one of your colors. I actually don't love these. I think they are indestructible, which is nice, but it is a land that gets swept up to farewell or of the likes, which is really sad. And so I think it's only worth the risk if you have something that cares about a mass number of artifacts, like your commander has affinity for artifacts or something like that. Then I would run these, but that's really niche to me, so I put them as a C, and then Jason and Preston have them as a B.
Unlike snow or deserts or anything like that, artifact is a way more abundant theme. There's so many more options. You're not nearly as limited. So these are always auto includes in your artifact decks because they don't get blown up by the artifact ones that blow stuff up. And the value you're going to get out of having another artifact on the battlefield is going to outweigh getting hit by a farewell. If you
But
get
that's
hit
not
by a
true for
farewell
all
with your
artifact
artifact
decks,
deck,
right?
losing
Like like a lot of artifact decks, like your artifact synergies are when you cast an artifact or whatever, like your land drops usually aren't feeding into that. Like sometimes that's obviously not true, but I just think that like saying that these are auto include in artifact decks seems kind of silly.
But you're gonna have like those creatures +1/+1 for all your artifacts. When an artifact comes into play, you get an advantage. Like, yeah, these don't trigger the casting artifact stuff, but your artifact deck probably doesn't only have those as part of the theme. Like having another artifact that's indestructible on the field is just going to help your theme out almost in every single artifact deck. It just is.
Yeah, I got to agree with Preston because I think that there's a lot more utility for these lands in decks that like even if you're running a heavy artifact deck, you should include these in there because you're probably going to be able to synergize with them. But even if you're not running like even if artifacts isn't like the main theme, this still is a good land. It's indestructible. It's going to tap for, two different colors and I just it being indestructible is really, really, really what helps for me. Because yeah, sure, it'll go away if it gets exiled. Yeah, and I mean it sucks to have to lose a land to a farewell, but it also sucks when somebody casts Armageddon and destroys all the lands. But wait a minute, my lands are gonna stay around because they're indestructible.
Also, if you get farewelled in an artifact deck, there's a good chance you're losing anyways. You don't care that
Probably.
you have the one less mana.
Well,
And
You
sure,
care
it's
but at
more about
least
all
that
the
at least you
and
can
other
like
stuff
top
you just
deck more
lost.
answers. It's harder to catch up with your lands.
yeah, but here's the thing, it's not like that. It's not like that every land that you're gonna play is gonna be an artifact land. And it's not
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say that half the lands that you're gonna play are gonna be artifact lands unless that's just how you build your mana base, which I think would be a mistake. But I think that even when that happens and they get exiled in that instance, I think it's gonna hurt, but I don't think it's gonna hurt as bad as I don't think it's gonna hurt any worse than just your artifacts getting exiled normally.
Don't build a 10 or a 5 color artifact deck and run all of these. That's a little risky,
That
maybe.
is a mistake.
But outside of that, you'll be fine.
That'd be hilarious. All right, so we'll go ahead and put these in B. We got a couple more. We got next up the Horizon lands. These are lands that will ping you to add your colors, or you can pay one and tap them, sacrifice them to draw a card. So, for example, Horizon Canopy, tap it, pay a life, add a green or a white, or you can pay one, tap it, sacrifice it to draw a card. I like these in aggro 2-color decks where you probably only need the mana for a couple turns, and then you can catch it in to draw a card later. That feels niche enough to me, though, that it's a C. I could see maybe that's a bottom of B kind of card, but close enough. And then Jason gave it an A, and Preston gave it a D.
So the reason that I'm so high on these is because of that value that you can get from it in the late game if you need it. Like if you need a card more than you need that land, you have the ability to get that card. Um and I think it's the same thing where, paying one life in Commander isn't that big of a deal, but also because cards like Yavimaya and Urborg are so heavily played, there's going to be plenty of times where you don't even need to pay the life for these and you can just tap it for one of those colors. Um, I think that there's a lot more value, and maybe I'm too high on these, but I think that these are pretty good.
I don't know if this matters. This probably doesn't sway anyone's opinion, but there are only 6 of these. There's 4 of them that we don't have. I don't think that's enough of a matter to sway anyone's opinion one way or the other, but just as a note. Preston.
You know what? No, change my answer from D to F. We don't have all 10. Garbage.
All right, so Horizon Lands,
Covered.
we're a little torn on them, but it's going to average out to a C. I'll put them towards the top of C, just to make Jason feel a little bit better about them. Come on, computer, stop lagging. All right, there we go. All right, next up we have everyone's favorite immature joke, the Tainted Lands. There's only 4 of these because they have to go with 2-color combinations that include black. So, for example, we have Tainted Peak, taps for a colorless, or it can tap to add red or a black, but you can only activate that ability if you control a swamp. Note, they are not fetchable, but they do always enter the battlefield untapped. If you are a Eldrazi deck or something, they do tap for colorless. That's kind of nice. However, I gave them a C Because not only do I think these only work in two-color decks, but you have to be heavier on black. So not just so for Tainted Peak, you don't just have to be a Rakdos deck. You have to be more heavy on black than you are on red to increase the chances that this is actually tapping for colors. So for me, it's a C. Jason has it as an A, and then Preston has it as a B. Discuss.
Uh, all of them except for the black green one are S tier lands. Tainted Wood is an F tier land because the joke isn't as funny with that one.
Yeah.
Uh,
I gotta put these in A tier because they'll always enter untapped. That's just the thing. And I mean, you don't have to tap them for the color. You can tap them for just a colorless, and you get use out of them even if you don't meet the exact requirements. But I'll tell you this, at some point in the game, if you don't meet the requirements right now, you will meet the requirements. Like, unless you're just screwed on lands and you can't play any other lands, but that just means you have a whole other problem going on in the game.
Mhm.
So these lands are going to tap for the colors you need more often than they won't. And even when they start out as not being able to tap for the colors that you need, you
you
will
still get
be
colors.
you will get to that color at some point, and you still get the colorless. So I think that they're A tier simply because they enter untapped and can tap for mana, and they have the potential when they enter to tap for the color that you need. And they only check for having one other land. Like, it doesn't even say basic plan, like basic land type. It just says if you have this type or the other type. So you pair these with some of the other ones that actually have land types. Now you're really talking.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Jason. Like it, if not right away, will eventually work. I played Tainted Isle in my zombie deck I used to have, and I remember I had one game where I didn't get to tap it for colors until like turn, I don't know, like right at the end of the game, which was really sad. But that was also just random. Like we said, that Magic is a game of chance and randomness, and sometimes that's just how it happens. It was a more black heavy deck than it was a blue heavy deck, and it still worked out that way. But yeah, these are going to average out to a B. They're if you're a black heavy deck, two colors, you're probably safe to run them. Last one,
These
we're not.
are oh,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say these are a cheap dual land that go up in value the more dual lands you have, which is nice if they have like the types on them.
Yeah, yeah. If they're fetchable, then that's true. That's true because it doesn't specifically check for if they're the basic. They just check if they have the type. So yeah, if you have other fetchable dual lands, these are better. Last up, we have just the generic tap lands. These are like what they put in like starter decks and stuff for beginners. They're Fs. You're better off. I think they're fine for teaching new players that dual lands exist. Um, but after you move on from the baby starter decks, I think you never play these and you just play basics over them. We all have them as Fs. Actually,
I
Jason
have
had them as
Yeah.
F minus.
I have F
Go off,
minus.
King.
Two
Yeah,
thumbs down.
if you were building on a micro budget, go for it. Otherwise, just run a basic.
Like you're building a $50 budget deck and you spent 30 of it on Field of the Dead. Right? Like that's
No, I seriously mean if you're building like a $10 deck, these can be justified.
But couldn't you just run a basic at that point? Like how much is the dual land? Like if you're on a $10 deck, don't you just go like half your land, like all your lands are basics at that point?
I
Probably, I'm
already
just saying that is theoretically an option,
I
but
already feel
that's
like
still
we've
an F.
talked I've already feel like we've talked about these too much. They're terrible.
All right. I
Fair
forgot to
enough.
load these into the tier list maker, but we do actually have one more. These are creature lands. Not all creature lands are dual lands. Some of them are only one color. Some of them are colorless. But specifically, there are the restless ones from recent standard sets. And I think these are really good. They're above rate creatures. So for example, I don't know, let's say Restless Cottage. It enters the battlefield taps for a black or a green. You can pay two black green to turn it into a 4/4 until end of turn. And then when it attacks, create a food token and exile up to one target card from a graveyard. So it's a little bit of graveyard hate while also giving you the opportunity to gain life, or if you care about the tokens. All of them do something like that. They're all enter tapped. They all tap for one of the 2 colors. We do have all 10 of these. They all have an attack trigger, and they're all pretty decent bodies for how much mana you're putting into them as far as creature lands go. I really like these. I have them as a low B, high C. I'm not always going to run them in my 2-color decks, but I will often put them in my 2-color decks. Outside of that, I'm not going to play them unless I have some kind of specific synergy for creature lands. Jason has them as a B. Preston has them as a D.
Yeah, I just ranked them low. I just never played creature lands. Like, if I was going to, it would be the Restless site, something from the Restless cycle. I do think these are about as good as you're going to get as far as creature lands go. Besides maybe the colorless one that puts 2+++1 counters on itself. That's the only creature land I've ever played in decks before.
I think the
So
1-color ones from the D&D set are fine. Like Den of the Bugbear, those
actually no, I do use Den of the Bugbear and Goblins, sorry.
Mhm.
But yeah, for the 2-color lands, there's the Restless Cycle and a few others. I might run the Restless at some point. Some of these attack triggers are decent, but some of them are kind of stinky.
I say that they're B tier because first of all, you don't have to activate them at sorcery speed.
True.
So you can, let your opponent think that you don't have any blockers, pay mana into it, create a blocker, maybe kill something that they have. But then the other reason that I put them, I need to find it. I can't remember that card's name. Ah, the other reason that I put them into B tier is because of the card Lava Claw Reaches. That's an infinite mana sink. It's a red and black infinite mana sink. You turn it into a creature for 1 and then 1 black and 1 red, and then you can literally pump it as much as you want if you have infinite mana, or even if you can generate a ton of mana. Like if you can generate 10 mana, you pay 10 mana into this after you've turned it into a creature, and it gets +10/+0. So because you could do stuff like that, and this is a win con in certain decks that can generate infinite mana, even if it's not a deck where you're like turning your creatures into lands into creatures, excuse me. The fact that you have that option with this land, and then the utility that you're going to get from the other creature lands, that's enough to keep it in B tier for me. But then also you got to remember, there's still a land that can tap for one of your colors.
All right, guys.
The best one is Restless Prairie because it's a llama.
I actually think I agree with that statement. Kronk approved. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it. That is our tier list for dual lands. This isn't literally every dual land, but this is almost all of them, all of the ones that are worth mentioning, I think. But let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with our list. Let us know what you would change. Let us know if there's maybe a favorite one that we somehow didn't mention or forgot, or maybe it's a stinker, but you really like it for some funny reason. We will be back next week for another topic. So until then, have a good one. We will see you later. Bye.